If you've been involved with a narcissistic woman, one of the most confusing parts of the experience is this: the stronger, calmer, and more emotionally grounded you tried to be, the more tension seemed to grow. You may have thought maturity would help. You may have believed honesty, patience, and emotional stability would bring peace to the relationship. Instead, it often felt like those very qualities made things worse. The more centered you were, the more she pushed. The less reactive you became, the more provocative her behavior seemed. And after a while, you may have started asking yourself a painful question. Why does doing the right thing create so much conflict? The answer matters because many people leave these relationships blaming themselves. They think they were too distant, too guarded, too firm, too serious, or too hard to please. But in many of these situations, the issue was never that you were emotionally unavailable. The issue was that you were emotionally solid. And for a narcissistic person, emotional solidity in someone else can feel deeply threatening. That is what many people do not understand. Emotionally strong men are not hard to connect with in a healthy relationship. They are hard to control in an unhealthy one. And when someone relies on control, emotional confusion, and power imbalance to feel secure, they will often struggle around a man who does not bend easily, does not lose himself quickly, and does not hand over his identity just to keep the peace. This does not mean emotionally strong men never feel pain. It does not mean they are cold, detached, or superior. It means they usually have some inner structure. They can feel deeply without collapsing. They can care without becoming desperate. They can love without abandoning themselves. And that kind of stability creates a problem for a narcissistic woman, because narcissism often feeds on emotional leverage. At the core of it, this is about control and regulation. Many narcissistic women do not know how to create emotional safety through honesty, mutual respect, and accountability. Instead, they create stability by managing the emotional environment around them. They test reactions. They read weaknesses. They use attention, distance, praise, blame, affection, guilt, or silence to shape the other person's behavior. This is not always fully conscious in a calculated way, but it is still manipulative. It is still about power. And when that pattern meets a man who has emotional discipline, self-respect, and a strong sense of reality, the usual tools start to fail. In the beginning, this can actually intensify attraction. A narcissistic woman may feel pulled toward an emotionally strong man because he has qualities she wants access to. He seems grounded. He does not chase approval. He has presence. He may seem harder to impress, and that can trigger pursuit. For a while, she may become highly attentive, charming, affectionate, and deeply interested in him. But underneath that attraction is often another motive: the need to win influence over someone who feels emotionally self-contained. That is why the early stage can feel so intense. She may mirror his values, admire his strength, and seem unusually invested. He may feel seen, respected, even cherished. But as the relationship progresses, a shift often happens. Once she realizes that emotional access does not automatically equal emotional control, frustration starts to build. She begins to discover that he may care for her deeply, but he is not easy to dominate. He will not hand over his inner world in exchange for approval. He will not constantly prove himself. He will not let every accusation redefine him. And this is where the struggle begins. One of the first ways this shows up is through testing. She may create small emotional traps to see how much influence she has. She may withdraw affection and wait to see if he panics. She may become cold after closeness and watch whether he chases. She may make subtle comparisons, flirt with ambiguity, or stir insecurity just to see if he becomes unstable. These are not signs of intimacy. These are signs of emotional probing. She is trying to locate the points where she can control his state. When a man is not emotionally strong, these tactics often work quickly. He becomes anxious, over-explains, apologizes for things he did not do, and starts performing for reassurance. But when a man stays calm, asks direct questions, or refuses to engage in emotional games, she may experience that not as maturity, but as resistance. She may then label him insensitive, detached, arrogant, or emotionally unavailable. But often what she is really reacting to is the fact that she cannot easily pull him out of himself. This is important because many men come away from these relationships carrying false shame. They think, maybe I should have been softer. Maybe I should have reassured her more. Maybe I was too firm. But emotional strength is not cruelty. Boundaries are not neglect. Refusing manipulation is not a lack of love. In a healthy relationship, emotional strength creates trust. In a narcissistic dynamic, emotional strength interrupts control, and that is why it gets punished.
Another reason narcissistic women struggle with emotionally strong men is that emotionally strong people reflect reality. They do not always react on cue. They notice patterns over time. They compare words with behavior. They may give grace, but they do not endlessly ignore contradiction. And narcissism depends heavily on managing appearances. It depends on narrative control. It needs other people to accept a version of reality that protects the narcissistic person from shame, responsibility, and emotional exposure. An emotionally strong man is harder to recruit into that false reality. He may notice that affection disappears when he asserts a need. He may see that vulnerability is used selectively, often to avoid accountability. He may recognize that conflict never leads to repair, only to reversal, blame, or emotional exhaustion. He may start to sense that he is being positioned into a role rather than loved as a whole person. And once he sees that clearly, the illusion becomes harder to maintain. That can trigger escalation. She may become more critical, more dramatic, more wounded, or more unpredictable. She may accuse him of being the problem because he is no longer responding in the way she needs. This is one of the most painful parts of the experience. The very qualities that once attracted her now seem to provoke resentment. His calm becomes cold. His confidence becomes ego. His boundaries become control. His need for honesty becomes attack. And if he has spent enough time being confused, he may start defending himself against a version of himself that is not even true. This is how emotional erosion happens. Not always through open abuse at first, but through repeated distortion. He starts second-guessing his motives. He explains himself more than he wants to. He spends energy proving basic decency. He becomes hyper-aware of her moods, careful with his tone, cautious with his truth. And even if he remains outwardly strong, inwardly, he may begin to feel drained, lonely, and mentally crowded. That is because manipulation does not only wound through chaos, it also wounds through chronic pressure on your reality. Narcissistic women also struggle with emotionally strong men because those men often do not provide the endless emotional supply that narcissism craves. Narcissistic supply is not just attention. It is the feeling of being powerful, central, desired, and able to shape another person's emotional state. If she can make him obsess, doubt himself, pursue harder,
or stay emotionally off balance, she feels impact. She feels significance. She feels control. But if he remains connected to himself, if he can love without losing perspective, then she may feel strangely empty around him, even while saying she wants depth and security. This is why some narcissistic women say they want a strong man, but then destabilize one when they have him. What they often want is not strength in the true sense. They want the image of strength beside them, with the emotional compliance of someone weak underneath. They want a man who looks solid in the world, but becomes deeply manageable in private. They want admiration without challenge, devotion without boundaries, and presence without independent judgment. Real emotional strength does not offer that. A strong man also disrupts another common narcissistic pattern, the use of guilt as a control tool. In many toxic dynamics, guilt becomes the chain. If she is upset, he must fix it. If she is disappointed, he must carry it. If she feels insecure, he must shrink himself to soothe her. Over time, he is trained to feel responsible not just for his behavior, but for her emotional state as a whole. But emotionally strong men eventually start noticing the difference between compassion and captivity. They realize they can care without accepting false responsibility. They can listen without surrendering their reality. And once they stop absorbing guilt automatically, her usual methods lose force. This often leads to another tactic, victim positioning. When control weakens, some narcissistic women move quickly into a wounded identity. Suddenly, every boundary becomes cruelty. Every calm refusal becomes abandonment. Every request for accountability becomes an attack. The goal is not resolution. The goal is to reestablish emotional dominance by making him feel harsh for seeing clearly. If he is empathetic, this can be especially effective, because empathy without clarity is easy to exploit. But empathy is not supposed to cost you your judgment. Care is not supposed to require self-betrayal. And this is one of the deepest lessons emotionally strong men often learn through these relationships. Being kind is not enough. If kindness is not paired with discernment, it becomes a doorway for manipulation. If patience is not paired with boundaries, it turns into endurance of what should never be normalized. Another reason these relationships become so strained is that emotionally strong men are less likely to collapse into emotional roles. Narcissistic dynamics often assign roles without saying it directly. One person becomes the rescuer, the stable one, the guilty one, the pursuer, the parent, the emotional container, or the one who is always wrong. These roles keep the system running. They simplify complexity and protect the narcissistic person from true mutuality. But emotionally strong men tend to resist staying in roles that strip away their humanity. They may try for a long time. They may carry more than they should. But eventually, something in them pushes back. They realize they are not in a relationship. They are in an arrangement built around someone else's emotional needs. That moment of clarity can feel both painful and freeing. Painful because it forces them to accept that love was mixed with manipulation. Freeing because it helps them stop chasing answers that were never meant to bring peace. Many people trapped in narcissistic relationships keep believing that if they just explain themselves better, love better, stay calmer, or try harder, the dynamic will finally make sense. But some dynamics do not improve through deeper investment. They improve only when you stop participating in the distortion. That is where awareness begins. Not in dramatic confrontation, but in quiet recognition. You start noticing the cycle instead of getting pulled into each episode. You stop asking only, "How do I fix this?" and start asking, "What exactly is happening here?" You notice how often closeness is followed by destabilization. You notice how your boundaries trigger backlash. You notice how accountability turns into accusation. You notice how your nervous system has been trained to stay on alert. And, little by little, what once felt personal begins to look patterned. That shift matters because you cannot heal from what you are still romanticizing. You cannot protect your peace while constantly translating disrespect into hidden pain, or calling manipulation complexity. Clarity is not cruelty. It is self-respect. It is the willingness to see what something is, even when part of you still wishes it were different. From there, real empowerment becomes possible. Not the kind built on anger or revenge, but the kind built on steadiness. You stop trying to win understanding from someone committed to misreading you. You stop over-explaining your limits. You stop negotiating your dignity. You let your no be simple. You let silence do some of the work. You stop trying to manage her image of you, because you understand that someone who needs control will often mislabel your strength, no matter how gently you carry it. Calm detachment is powerful here. Not coldness, not punishment, not emotional shutdown. Just the refusal to keep feeding a system that harms you. You stay anchored in facts. You reduce emotional overexposure. You protect your mind from circular arguments. You remember that not every accusation deserves analysis, and not every emotional display deserves access to your inner world. This is not about becoming hard. It is about becoming clear. And if you are healing from one of these relationships, be patient with yourself. Emotional strength does not mean the experience did not affect you. In fact, strong people are often deeply affected because they stayed with integrity for so long. They kept trying to love well. They kept trying to be fair. They gave the benefit of the doubt when others would have left sooner. So, if you are grieving, if you are exhausted, if you still replay conversations in your head, that does not mean you are weak. It means the confusion was real. The erosion was real. The bond was real to you, even if the dynamic was unhealthy. Healing starts when you stop measuring your worth through the eyes of someone who needed your imbalance to feel secure. It deepens when you reconnect with your own reality, your own pace, your own values. You begin to trust the part of you that noticed something was off. You stop calling your instincts overreactions. You learn that peace is not boring, clarity is not emptiness, and mutual respect is not too much to ask. In the end, narcissistic women struggle with emotionally strong men for one simple reason. Emotional strength cannot be easily controlled. A grounded man may still love, still care, still feel, but he is less willing to abandon himself in order to maintain the connection. And when a relationship depends on confusion, dependency, and emotional power plays, that kind of strength becomes intolerable. So, if you were made to feel that your steadiness was the problem, remember this. Your calm was not the issue. Your boundaries were not the issue. Your need for honesty was not the issue. The problem was that your strength exposed a dynamic built on imbalance. And once you see that clearly, you no longer have to keep shrinking yourself to make dysfunction feel comfortable. You get to choose something better now. You get to choose relationships where strength is welcomed, not punished. Where honesty leads to repair, not retaliation. Where love does not require self-erasure. Where your nervous system can finally rest. And when that happens, you will understand something that may be hard to see right now. The peace you were looking for was never going to come from winning over someone committed to control. It comes from returning to yourself, protecting what is true, and moving forward with quiet strength.